Libertarian? Whiskey? Ah, Libertarian! You could never unlock my secret. Oh no! Suddenly, hello, Libby! Let's begin. Indeed.
All right, and we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and I am. This is the Fireside Chat, and I'm joined today by a very special guest. Well, I only know your like online sort of persona, which is FabianLiberty. So that's how I, put your name on the screen there. And you can check out all of his links. I put them in the description of this video. Fabian, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I I had some people reach out, and I mean, I wasn't super familiar with kind of like the Honey Badger, group, if you will. But like people were like, hey, no, like if you want to talk about libertarianism and talk about men's issues, like these are some of the people to like you should absolutely have a chat with. And I was like, okay, well, I'll reach out on DM, and I feel like it'd be a fun conversation. So I'm all here for it.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Real quick,
I don't know.
Your audience knows, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I am the end boss of libertarianism, if you will. I'm as libertarian gets. And that's mostly what my content revolves around, debating and discussing libertarian philosophy or debating, lefties in the online space. That's mostly what I do.
Right. And that's fine. Like I have ANCAP leanings myself. Frankly, I think that men's issues, maybe we should like define our terms before we start talking about this, because I think that we get like in a kind of collective blanket way, we get lumped in with all kinds of other people that maybe they have like louder voices, but they don't really share the same principles. And so I guess what was the comment, just to refresh everybody and for people who don't know, what was the comment that sort of spurred this conversation? Do you remember? You made a comment on Twitter.
I'm way too ADHD to remember that.
Okay. You made a comment on Twitter about men's rights activists being just like feminists. And
some of them are, for sure.
Yeah, and somebody that is a fan of ours, I think, or like they're a support of ours, said you should... Yeah, Sick Fox, that's right. And Sick Fox he replied to you, I think it was him. If not, forgive me. If you are the person, but you're not that person, just clear it up in the comments, and I apologize. But basically said, hey, you should talk to these people because, we're not like, I don't know, it just doesn't fit in with our modus operandi, as it were.
Yeah, so let me say, so to clear the ground, right, as you were saying, like what do I think men's issues are, right? I think there is deleterious effects towards things that the consequences of how society changes tend to affect one gender one way and another gender the other way because they're different, right? So I would be very, very vague about what I mean by men's issues. I obviously we can get specific in discussions about child support or marriage and family, or about men being able to be open about certain issues, or whatever those things may be. But ultimately I think that's what those are, men's issues, right? And the way that I see the manosphere, the people talking about it, is kind of all over the place, right? I think you have some men's rights activists that are very whiny, unmanly, if you will, and you can get mad at me if you want about that, right? Like, very much bringing the bitch energy in, complaining about being an incel and things of that nature. It's doomer pilled, etc. And then you have red pill people, some of which I think are trying to do well-meaning, but are often completely ignorant of how science is conducted or what the studies they're referencing even mean. Then you have grifters like Andrew Tate and people like that are just saying the wildest things. Andrew Tate recently said, just went on a whole rant about how you need 30 children and the white race is doomed because, we're not cheating on women and we're not like fucking everyone. We don't have multiple mistresses, that we have sex with no condoms. And this is why blacks are superior. Just completely.
He says,
right?
He's just, well, I think that not to cape for Andrew Tate, because I can get into like why I think his voice or voices like his are more predominant than like say ours. I think that there's an advantage that the sort
Negative
of like
engagement.
establishment. Yeah, it's like on purpose, I think. But what I would say is I think that he would. I think what he's trying to do is be provocative so that people talk about him.
He's sparking negative engagement. It works.
And it works. It does, because he's saying the thing that feminists and the media and politicians and academics and intellectuals, it's the stuff that they love to like make what the manosphere is about, or make what this part of the internet is about.
While at the same time saying the quiet part out loud too, right? Because they try to be subtle about it.
Well, who's they? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I don't mean the Jews. Just real quick.
No. I mean like
I'm messing with you.
When you say who's saying the quiet part out loud, that's what I don't. I honestly don't follow.
Andrew Tate is saying the quiet part out loud that I think a lot of frustrated manosphere people or other people are saying that are, into the more polygamy aspect, like that the small group that he's highlighting, I think a lot of them are probably not. It's not so much that he's saying the quiet part out loud in the sense that they're not saying it, but that it's like it's out there now, right? That there is a very, very small contingent that has an opinion like that.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know. There are definitely frustrated men out there, and I don't think that them being frustrated makes them part of the manosphere. I think that you can be a frustrated male feminist and end up like murdering your roommate because she wanted to be in a polycule. And I am of the opinion that men should have like the equipment to be able to sort of like understand and navigate the world as it is, while we try to essentially like make the let's say the system more fair. And just to be clear on where I stand on that, I think that the comparison to feminists is only fair insofar as perhaps there are some men that are in those spaces that do a lot of complaining and whinging, and I get it, that's true, but I can't control that. But our goals, at least as here at HBR, and the people who work here, we don't all like have the same necessarily the same political beliefs. I think some people still like desperately grab on to like some degree of leftism, and I reject it completely. But we all are on the same page in terms of what we want. And ultimately what that is the difference between men's rights activists and feminists is the real important difference is that feminists are statists, and every solution, there is no such thing as a libertarian feminist. There have been women like Hannah Cox, you can like look at her content online. She claims to be a part of Reason, I think it's Reason magazine or something like that.
Reason aren't fucking libertarian.
No, they're not.
Much
but I'm
less
saying but she brands herself that way, right? Yeah. And she is obviously, by nature of her being a feminist, she must be a statist. And what we want is not to use the state to benefit men, because it can't benefit men. We want the state to get out of men's way, to basically get out of men's lives. But the problem, where the struggle is at, is that women generally are gravitating toward, they tend to gravitate towards the state, with only some exceptions. This is like an old problem, right? Women value security over liberty, and men value liberty over security. You probably have seen this yourself if you are indeed the final boss of libertarianism. You have seen that it's not popular with women in general, right?
Yeah, I mean, so there are incentives that are going to be stronger towards females than males, right? I mean, so one of the big problems that I think we have, and this is especially true in the manosphere, because this is really my goal in talking about men's issues at all, is I have three basic goals, three things that I think we need, right? Number one, we need libertarianism as a political philosophy, because we need the non-aggression principle, because we're actually going to solve these problems. We can't use the state. That's only going to be band-aids that are going to cause more problems. Number two, I think we need to return to conservative values, not necessarily conservative religious values, but values that are not dysgenic. We as a society can't be openly super pro OnlyFans and super openly pro prostitution and degeneracy and hedonism everywhere if we expect to have some normalcy return in relationships in as a whole in society. And number three, and this is what I think makes the manosphere and men's issues particularly interesting, is that I think that the manosphere and what we're seeing in these issues is actually a symptom of what occurs when trust in institutions is completely eroded, and when the science is supposed to inform us and the science has abandoned us. I think the men's issues and gender, like, I think that this woke kind of leftist feminist nonsense is actually not as strong. People think it's strongest in sociology or in legal or in education. It's actually strongest in sex research, gender-based research. That is the strongest place that this is. And so what we are left with is a dearth of scientific research and understanding. And so what you have, I think, is a bunch of manosphere people trying to understand science that they're not necessarily trained in, or that they haven't like spent their whole life in, and trying to make sense out of what little there is to understand gender and sex and relationship differences, especially as society goes the way of South Korea, where women keep getting more and more feminist and men are starting to become more and more traditional. And there's a lot of bad roadblocks ahead, especially with this lack of science and lack of the non-aggression principle being stated so deeply. And then, of course, those conservative values. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, so, like that's all stuff that we have said ourselves. The problem is that the incentives for women are so overwhelming. Like, this is the thing, what we see it, okay? Until women actually step up to the plate and take a long, hard look at themselves and decide that they're going to essentially resist the temptations for immediate earthly joy, whatever you want to call it, right? These incentives, then things are only going to get worse. So yes, you're right that a lot of this feminist stuff begins in a kind of sexual or like sex education, but it bleeds out into every single aspect of our society. It is in everything. And so women
are you familiar with
love
systems theory?
I mean, I've talked to some people about it before, but what do you want to say about this?
Well, no, it's just, the kind of push-pull, right? The push-pull of institutions versus the individuals in society, right? Right. It's like the chicken and egg kind of comes to mind when you discuss systems theory, because you're positing that women as a whole need to kind of give up the carrot, right? And just stop chasing the carrot that the institutions are forcing upon them. And in a way that will change the institutions. And yet the reverse is often true too, right? Which is if you got rid of the carrot, so it was just an interesting.
That could be that could also be true, but there is a problem with that. This is why I'm not saying that women have to be the only ones. I'm saying they have to be a part of the solution, right?
Oh, for sure.
So, and right now, like literally there is like women have replaced men in their life with the state. And they have been convinced, you can say through propaganda or education. I think it's a number of factors. Plus, we're also kind of 3 generations in, like after the Great Society and all of these other socialist policies that have essentially paid women to exclude fathers from the home. So we're in the middle of the story now. Like you can't put the genie back in the bottle without essentially asking people, men and women, but I think in particular women, because I think men are generally ready to do whatever it takes to to accomplish their goals. I think most people come into the world and this is just a simple thing that doesn't have to be political at all, and it shouldn't be. They want to meet someone of the opposite sex, they want to marry them, and they want to have kids with them. And that's like the best outcome you can have for a society. But women are not incentivized to do that, and men are starting to respond. Some of them retreat into like online, communities like the Red Pill or the Manosphere because they want to understand what's happening. Some of them go and become incels and they kind of like go down this doomer spiral.
Right.
Yeah,
Some just become Sigma badasses.
Or that.
Like, I go to the gym, I work out, and I don't give a fuck about bitches.
That's true, but in the long run, this is the problem that we're facing. Without, I don't want to go too much of a tangent here, but there is a problem with this. Is that if people in the West like don't start forming families, like our replacement rates are low, and the borders are open, and people who will make babies will come in this country, and they will like essentially populate the people who are here, and like that libertarian dream is not going to happen. Like, we will be living under a caliphate like what's happening in the UK right now, right? So this is the thing, like the problem of men and women coming together and forming families is the baseline for every other problem. It comes first. It's where life begins, right?
There's another danger here, right? And I know this is a dangerous topic because this book is very dangerous because of a specific chapter about race and IQ. But setting aside,
I don't have a problem with that at all.
Right, but nevertheless, I don't know you, and I'm just saying that that's not really what I'm trying to talk about, anyways, right?
Sure.
Is the bell curve the main point of the bell curve? The actual thesis of the book, if you could, nail it down to one thesis, is about IQ drain in demographics, right? Is a concept
the brain drain, right?
Right, the brain. Well, not just from other countries, but because we used to live in, small towns where people very rarely left a small town, highly intelligent, well-to-do men would marry, potentially maybe the smart girl in town, but there wasn't this I want to back up just for a second before I get into
Sure.
this. One of the biggest problems that I have, and that is really difficult with talking about these issues, especially when talking about sociology, is that human beings don't have heuristics for two things. And this is really, really important as our society becomes technological, more interconnected, as more data gets thrown into things. And so what those two things are we don't have accurate heuristics for deviation, standard deviation, and standard distribution, right? We don't really understand like logarithmic scale. Like, we don't really understand, for example, when someone uses the term mid, right? That they're kind of referring to someone between, a 3 and a 7. Right. But what we think, when we think average, we think 10, 20, 30, 40% of the population, when a standard distribution is really 66.7%, right? We don't really think that way because we're supposed to live in communities of like 200, right? And we don't really understand exponentials. We don't really get that. And so I think it becomes difficult for us to deal with things like online dating, for example, where thousands of people are put into your kind of your local situation. And all of a sudden the effects of distributions become so much more drastic. And this is something that is true too of what you're speaking about, of not having children and pair bonding and IQ, is that we're because of this inability to understand the problem with a simple heuristic, and because of the immigration, and because of the kind of the lack of breeding, because we're no longer as much of a high trust society. Men cannot trust a woman to marry them and not fuck them and not end up in divorce court. We're losing trust in our society, and that means our birth rate is declining because of that trust. What you have is a really scary situation where the low IQ immigrants, and I'm not saying all immigrants are low IQ, legal immigrants actually tend to be slightly smarter because of brain drain. When you're talking about 7.2 million people coming across the border in one presidency, and most of these people being the poor, the destitute, the unsuccessful, you're talking about a low IQ population. Or the criminal. And so what you're dealing with is a situation where you're going to have a very, very, very small breeding amount in the high IQ, incredibly high IQ people that are moving away from a mass of low IQ breeding. And the very class issues that our society kind of tried to help solve by the creation of a middle class and capitalism and markets and liberal democracy is going to disappear, because you're going to have demographics of high IQ, low population, and demographics of low IQ, high population. and it's going to cause more problems than most of us, I think, are willing to admit. Because
absolutely,
racism
absolutely.
discussion.
Yeah, well, that's a distraction, right? We can't have an honest conversation about like what will be the incentives. How does, and I mean, I don't know that it's like a bit of a distraction to get on the topic of demographic change and the border, but yeah, I mean, like I think that like it's definitely a factor. There's actually a good question to ask because women overwhelmingly voted for this. And I think that Scott Adams, he made a tweet about this a while back where he said that women were they voted for more men to come in because they wanted to open up like their odds of breeding with an appropriate man by just letting all the men in. I know. I don't know if I believe that. But like we are talking in some way, we are talking a bit about hypergamy, which is totally real. So when for most of human history, marriages were arranged, and it wasn't because of some like, patriarchal control from the top down or anything. It was mostly about, like you just married people that were in your vicinity. So if you lived in a village, the girl in the village would, date you, or well, like she would meet your parents, or your parents already knew each other, and you were just kind of set up, and nobody really thought of it like as a restriction outside of anything except for vicinity, and then as technology advanced and we industrialized and we started going into cities, then it changed that a little bit more. And I'm not even talking about like, the aristocracy, which mostly married for like political reasons. And now that we live in the modern world, no, that's another, I'm saying that's a different thing. But now that we live in the modern world, dating has become like globalized, right? Essentially, or almost globalized, because we all have the world at our fingertips and we can meet people from anywhere. But what ends up happening is that you do end up with things going like women are constantly thinking about like, is this the right choice? Am I getting the best deal, the best bang for the buck, for my buck or whatever? And they end up, swiping, like, what is it when you reject somebody? I don't do online dating. I'm married. Is it swipe right on everybody that you don't like? And so, you get like these extremely skewed statistics, and women's preferences are basically through the roof because they have this idea, like this sort of overinflated sense of self. And most men
I want to talk about that and a couple other things, because I think this is a prime example. This is a bit of a myth. And this is a prime example of what has happened because science and researchers have abandoned this issue completely in favor of junk, pseudo scientific bullshit that the feminists put forward. There is this myth based off of like Tinder and OkCupid studies, etc., right? That kind of exaggerates the female experience of like whom they choose and whom they don't choose, right? So there are a couple of confounding variables when we look at it. Number one is that some women are swiping left a bunch out of a habit, and because they have no desire because they're looking for backups, or because they're, even though they're in a relationship, so they're cheating, or because they are, because they need some type of validation. They want to see what's out there, so they're questioning, or simply because they're testing the waters, even though they don't have a desire to actually date. And these are things that, while yes, men do these things, they do them to the much less degree. So this kind of skews the data, right? Like the data is really controlling for these things. And then another thing about this data is, is that it always focuses on who's doing online dating, right? So that already is selecting a specific type of female versus other types of, and there's a bunch of other confounding variables. Another one being that men get desperate, and so they swipe often people that they won't actually date. Then they'll be rude or disgusting towards those people because they're frustrated. And then women kind of cloister themselves and become even more protective of themselves. So they become even more like you have to be perfect, right? And it's less about women preferences in the dating market and more about the kind of the fucked upness around the way our brains don't really work well with online dating.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not really like doing the PUA thing. I'm just using this as an example of how the landscape has changed and what incentives women respond to in terms of like partners and also family and all this. Like women are waiting longer to have children. Women are like, there was do you know Tom Woods, I assume?
Yeah, I'm aware.
Tom Woods podcast. Like, okay, so he had a man on that has a website called natalism.org, and they did a whole show together, and we covered it on our channel that talked about the declining birth rates and that
I was thinking antinatalism in my head, and I was like, fuck those
no
people.
no, it was called natalism because it was a pro-natalist. Yeah, it was pro-natalist. But in there, this is the thing that was the shocking bit of data, because obviously I'm not in the business of matchmaking, you know, like in terms of that, whatever you guys do, whatever you think is best. I think there's probably like better ways to find a partner than I definitely know it's better than online dating. I think you should just look in your community. But what I think is worth bringing up, this is going back to the birth rates issue, is that the data that this guest on Tom Woods' show brought up, and I'm sorry I don't remember his name, but the website's called natalism.org.
Shows like Native Americans and immigrants are like the only people that are even replacing themselves.
Yeah, somewhat, right? And I think like in West Africa, if you look at the global
in the US,
map, in the US, right? So what is discovered is this though. Of the women that ended up not having children, only 10% did not end up having children for either medical reasons, like they're infertile, there was some problem, or they had some kind of like actual desire not to have kids. Like they actually stuck to their guns and said, I don't want kids. There are some women like that, just like there are some men like that. And I wouldn't be the one to say that you have to have kids. But 80% or 85%, maybe even higher than that, of women that did not end up having kids, it was not because they didn't want kids. It was because they waited too long, and then the window of fertility passed. It just didn't happen. They didn't find a man that was like, maybe there were some good men that they passed on because they were hoping for something better, and it just did not happen for them. And it's actually very tragic when you look at how massive that is, because I think that there is like a very big push in our culture, in our social culture, to ask women to not see family as important, to not want kids, etc. And they're trying to do this with men as well. But the truth is, most people across the board do want families and children. So what the effect is, and there's a lot of factors we can get into as to why that's happening. I think that there is a push to reduce the population, and I think it's coming top down. And I think there's plenty of evidence to show that. Like there's, these climate alarmists and these, it's just kind of like a general anti-natalist push. And it's all and I think it is having some effects, and we're seeing this now. So that's kind of like, but again, here's the thing. I just want to say, as a men's issues advocate, I don't like to say rights, because I think I don't like the word rights gets thrown around. I don't think it applies in most cases. Yeah, people call us men's rights activists. If it's a right,
it applies to all humans.
Yeah, but the reason why we call ourselves men's rights activists is because it was used against us as a pejorative by feminists, and we just kind of said, okay, then whatever. But like there are some things, like I'm against circumcision, for example. I think that's a violation of bodily autonomy, and that is a right. But mostly I just say issues, because a lot of this stuff does come from the state. It's things like the family courts and all of these, child custody laws and the welfare state and other things that I do think affect men in a lot of different ways. So
you have a bunch here.
Yeah.
You have a bunch to talk about here. So, maybe setting aside the arranged marriage thing, I have a slight disagreement with you, but I'm curious, just sort of like a little bit back.
I'm not promoting arranged marriages. I'm saying that for most of history, that's what it was. Yeah.
Well, you said this thing that there was like kind of like a feminist myth about this was done for patriarchal reasons. And I think I actually kind of disagree with you a little bit, in the sense that I kind of agree with the feminists to a certain degree here, that it was done for patriarchal reasons a little bit, as the man and male of the head of the household. Because when you're giving over your 14, 15, 16-year-old daughter to a 24, 25-year-old man, you really are, in a sense, transferring ownership of your daughter. Now, there wouldn't have been an ownership in slavery in the way that we would have, but it would be an understanding that your daughter is not a a fully autonomous individual that goes out forthrightly on their own to get their own property, to build their own farm, right? Like there's an expectation that she does need protection, and that she does need a man, and that she does need someone that is willing to do the things for her in order for them to create a family. And there is a certain passing off of one. And I think that's kind of part of what people are missing in is kind of fucking up our understanding of sexual autonomy around age, because we're starting to see feminists now that are like, oh, you like women under 25? Did you know their prefrontal cortex isn't developed until, somewhere between the ages of 24 and 26? You like that 22-year-old girl? You're a fucking pervert. And I think there's actually kind of some truth to that as well, which is that, no, you're not a fucking pervert because you like a 22-year-old girl, but there is an understanding that, yeah, there is a certain level of autonomy that one gains over time and with the development of their brain, and that we did used to have a system, might not be the best system, but a system that counteracted this, which was, you don't get to marry my daughter unless you prove yourself to the family that you're going to protect her, that you do love her, that you're going to work hard for her, and that you have the means of doing all of those things because I'm gifting my daughter to you. This is my most precious thing. Please protect her.
Sure. Well, what's the expectation on women in that scenario?
Childbirth, usually. Childbirth.
And what's the expectation on... Sure. What's the expectation on men in that scenario?
Protection, finances.
Would you say that those? Yeah. Would you say that those things, without getting into like how much truth or whatever, but would you say those things are relatively balanced? Like, does it make? I think it makes sense because men can't have babies, and women are vulnerable while carrying children. I'm not saying that this is I
would say they're relatively
that
balanced.
should be.
I don't think it skews in favor of women as much as people think.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, but I think that it is what it is. That's kind of like, I'm not trying to say that this is better than this. I'm just saying this is just what it is. I'm trying to.
I was just trying to answer your question.
Be real.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to. I'm just making sure that we know that my position on it is it is the nature of us as humans. It's just the way it's going to work out. And I think that the way that we've arranged marriage and family for most of our history, probably for the most part, is a decent model. And I think that this thing that we're going through now, post-sexual revolution, I think that that's all very recent stuff. I mean, yeah, what boys and girls probably got married pretty early on so they can start families and all that, and it's fine. Again, as my job here, doing this channel, is not about telling people how they should live their life or arrange their families, but rather we are it's to acknowledge that we do have a problem. We have a problem with the courts. I don't know if you saw that baseball player, I'm forgetting his name. He was a famous pitcher, and a woman did a false allegation, claimed that he beat her so that she can get a payday. And it was recently found out he had this whole fight. He lost his job. He had to he's playing for a Mexican team now because he had to leave the country because everyone thinks he's a piece of garbage, right? And
that's just funny. It's just funny that that he's playing. It was accused wife beater plays for Mexico, and they love him, saying he is machismo to the max.
No. Even over there, there are journalists saying hey, what about those things about you beating up that? But he's essentially proved his innocence. He had all the receipts, kept everything, and the guy is super rich, right? But the thing is that what we talk about is, okay, this guy lucked out, but a lot of men go through stuff like this. They lose their kids. If you look at, and it's always involves the state. There's literal incentives from the government for women to distance their children from their fathers. And this is one of the, I'm from Chicago. Now I live in Virginia now, but I was born and raised in Chicago. What?
I'm in Virginia too.
Oh, you are? Oh, I'm in Roanoke. What part you on? Bye.
I'm in Colonial Heights, Petersburg area.
Oh, okay. So that's cool. It makes sense. A lot of libertarians out here. But I was born and raised in Chicago, and I saw how bad the crime is. And I couldn't help but notice that the number one statistic, and they want us all talking about race, they want us all talking about these other things because they're basically trying to push for socialist policies, not as a fix, but just to like get something out of it. But the real issue is we're looking at destroyed families because fathers have been pushed out of the home because mothers, single moms, were incentivized to essentially exclude men from the home. And this is impacting the black population by leagues ahead of everybody else, but all the other groups are catching up. And I'm like, well, this is the most basic men's issue is fathers' rights. Now, are there deadbeats? Of course. I'm not saying that there aren't. But the thing is that there are no things in place to essentially cause women to make, like educated decisions about who they choose to reproduce with. We have all these things in place. We have protection, we got abortion, we got all this stuff, and yet we still have this problem. And I think it's just like,
well,
it's,
yeah, go ahead. Engage with that, right? Like, because we're talking about crime now, and crime is it's associated to fatherhood and the incentive structures there. So
it is not,
that, right? No, I didn't say it wasn't. I was just descriptively laying what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I would say that that is without a doubt a very big part of the equation, right? Obviously, we never want to do a univariate analysis, but I do understand what you mean, that is a huge part of it. Some of that goes away when you control for like poverty, right? Because obviously, single mother is going to be poorer than a family, under most circumstances, etc. But yes, for the and we have, unlike with most correlational kind of research, we do have the mechanisms for what we're talking about here, right? Which is like rough and tumble play, super important, especially in the couple years early development. And also the problem is worse than the data purports. And the reason the problem is worse than the data purports is because the data very often we don't discuss school-age children and the fatherlessness rates of children at a certain age. Because what ends up happening is when you look at the fatherlessness rate as a whole, you're looking at men that are still in the lives of, let's say, a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. And it's like, that is important for development. As I said, rough and tumble play is important, right? But when we're talking about, let's say, what's the fatherlessness rate of children in the inner city in a black community that's lower socioeconomic status or middle school and above, all of a sudden that percentage is actually 10-15% higher than the general overall percentage.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of issues there for sure. And the incentive structure on those is really problematic. I would also say that there are, Chicago's kind of a special case with like extra problems, right?
Sure. Corrupt government and all that. But I'm just saying, the
biggest one is that crime isn't necessarily correlated to poverty so much as it's correlated to relative poverty, right? So when you're poor and you see someone next to you that has a lot of money, that tends to influence crime. Whereas poverty in the country where everybody's poor together, they kind of have an honor system. There's a lot less crime. And so Chicago's special because they took all of the projects and to fix the problem, they spread them out throughout the entire city, and it caused a massive spike in the crime, and they still haven't recovered from it because they did the worst thing you could possibly do, which is spread poor people next to middle class and wealthy people because it just infuriates them. But yeah, no, I definitely see your point there.
I think you made a point about
more evidence of what I'm saying about the science. We lack science to really understand these problems because there's no researchers that are really doing there's like a couple of men's rights people, right, that are writing books, but there should be just as much as there's government money going to trans the fucking Palestinian kids or fucking government money to just study the effects of a frog population in geothermal power plants to make sure that the temperature doesn't rise too much, yet there's no studies beyond feminist crap on families, on the effects of men, on all of these things. There's no good research out there.
Well, that's probably not an accident. I mean,
I don't disagree at all. No.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. We're talking about universities and intellectuals there is no interest to address the problem. Like, for most of the time when I get into an argument with feminists or just like normie types, which I think most people on Earth have some feminist leanings. They believe some of the myths of this history, and so it informs their opinions on other things. They will generally not care about that data, and I agree with you. There should be more of it. And yes, there are MRAs and MRA adjacent folks writing about this stuff, but that just supports what I'm saying when I say that, you know, when you go on Twitter and the loudest voices that have any, like, I don't know, that are even in the same ballpark as like what we talk about are guys like Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit. And I can promise you that that's not an accident either. Like, if you promote the craziest people that have the wildest opinions, that are saying the most, like, you know, easily, let's say, the most wild stuff that people can characterize as representative of everything that we've been doing for 10 years, which has been looking at the data, looking at the studies, looking at where this comes from, then it's no surprise that some people are going to have negative opinions on all of us because they see what he's saying. But he gets paid because the algorithm favors that kind of content, and it doesn't favor ours.
Negative engagement, right? It always favors negative engagement, because negative engagement keeps people glued in, because most algorithms are designed for advertisers, and it's very dumb. And I think we're probably going to see this go away soon. And the reason I say I think we're going to see this go away soon is because I've been tracking corporate research, and corporate research is now pretty well aware that the value of engagement is actually not that great, because of the way that negative engagement next to an advertising campaign can actually cause people to have negative opinions about your brand as opposed to positive opinions. Because most corporate online branding is about touches, right? It's like, I need my product to be seen 6 or 7 times, then people will think about my product. But if people associate your product with a negative video that they watched, even subconsciously, it can be really, really bad, especially for brands like that are really innocuous, like toothpaste and things like that, right? Where people don't have any political feelings about Colgate. But setting all that aside, what I wanted to say is, like, this is really what I want to hone in on is the science being so bad has caused this problem that I'm seeing, where when I look kind of, because I'm not a manosphere person per se. I mean, I have some opinions. I do online streaming, but that's not like my brand. My brand is libertarianism, and I have a mostly male audience, which, you know,
frankly,
often.
I will say that I don't think those two things are that far apart. Now, I mean, like, if you're seriously trying to address, like, the problems between men and women,
of society,
you're gonna head this way. The only problem is, I will say, and I'll let you finish, is that I think that a lot of the world is not ready for a libertarian perspective. I think that too many people are statist, and it's gonna take a lot. But I'm generally in support of this.
That's why my name's FabianLiberty, because the Fabian socialists that pushed the concept of socialism one policy at a time. I realize it's like, I think incrementalism is probably going to be needed. I don't want it, I'd love for it to happen instantly. But anyways, about the science, and this is kind of the thing, is that, like, what I see happen is I see people really actually trying to understand the issues with big audiences and big voices, trying to understand things, but because they lack, I don't want to be insulting to all of the big manosphere people here, but hopefully, they don't take it too personally, but they lack a foundation of understanding how research is done, what statistics actually mean, or how to implement them, and understand the difference between correlation and causation, which is like, elementary school shit, but like also like understanding mechanisms and understanding overlap, right? And so, like, I wanted to bring a couple examples, because these are like really popular things. I think we can all like go, yep, and then we can all go, yeah, those are normal. People talk about it all the time. And then, so body count being one, right? Body count is something I see red pill people talk about often, all the time, and they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. They talk about body count, and they talk about the science, like they've read the science, right? And they'll talk about pair bonding. And this is a prime example of correlation and causation, because a woman's body count is a really good heuristic, right? Like, if a woman tells you she's had sex with 100 people, it's a really good red flag that, like, you're probably not going to have a successful relationship with that person. And if she says she's had sex with under 10 people and she's honest, right? That's a fairly decent heuristic. But people don't understand the mechanism that's occurring here. And so, like, you can find this research on, there's a Christian organization, Families Foundation, I can't remember. You can look at their research where they tracked how many sexual partners. And what they found was, like, obviously the number one best successful relationship was virgin, right? But then surprisingly, 1 and 2 previous sexual partners tended to be worse, more likely to divorce than 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that's because they had something to compare it to, but they hadn't really tested themselves out there, right? So now they're kind of questioning the validity of the relationship that they're in, et cetera. And so I have yet to see the study, so this is just a hypothesis. But there's no link between this concept of pair bonding with how many sexual partners you have. Instead, there's a correlation there. And so when I look at the research, I go, oh, well, what it appears to me, and it seems kind of obvious, honestly, is that what you're seeing is there's 2 types of girls, broadly speaking. A girl that will have one-night stands and fuck random people. And then there's the type of girl who won't fuck random people, won't have one-night stands, but will have sex with someone that they're in a serious committed relationship with. And so often we'll look at body count as like a number that like destroys the woman's psyche. And then we'll have red pillars talking about you need a virgin or you need as close to a virgin as possible. And then like you have women that have had sex with 6 or 7 dudes who were all their boyfriends for longer than 2 or 3 months. And it's like that woman doesn't have an issue pair bonding, right? Like that body count doesn't fucking matter there. Like what matters is like whether or not she treats sex as like something with someone that she loves in a committed relationship. And that's just like one example.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't have a problem with that. I think that in general, like, you know, it's not as simple as like, what's your body count? But if it's really high, I think that is a red flag. I think that a man can still try to save her, try to fix her if he wants. I don't think it's a good idea personally. But again, I'm not in the business of necessarily giving relationship advice. I've found my unicorn. I'm done. You know what I mean? Like
I'm not saying I'm giving all the relationship advice.
I know.
You're Savo.
I'm saying don't be don't be a simp. But and that's something that I do think. I think that like ultimately, again, I'm not going to answer for like what these manosphere guys that are the loudest voices say. I think that, you know, and again, it is just another obstacle for us to overcome. I roll with people like Warren Farrell and Paul Elam and people who have written books on the subject.
Yeah, I've read some of Warren Farrell's stuff.
Yeah, and these guys are like
really good. He did really good work on Rough and Tumble Play, as I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah. I mean, you know, he's cool. I mean, I don't agree with him politically, but I think that he's made, you know, he's done work that, you know, I can only have tremendous respect for. But again, this comes back to what the issue is for us is, you know, we're having trouble reaching people because our content, which is, it's not necessarily positive. I mean, it's just like kind of like pointing out like this is how severe things are, and we will rebut like various, you know, sort of like articles or studies. We'll look at them, and a lot of it is crap because it comes out of academia, and academia is in bed with the state as well. And so these are things that just won't, this is the problem, right? We won't get good studies because good studies cost money, and it's very hard to build that foundation. It's just kind of like, you know, wanting to lobby for men's issues on the political stage. It's a pipe dream. Like nobody cares about men enough to like actually affect policy until, you know, you get into a crisis situation, which we may be approaching.
I think genetically speaking, that's a good thing, right? I do think, in a weird way, I do think it is absolutely good that men care more about women than they care about men's issues. I think that should be the case because women are like low, you know, doom comes to any society that doesn't venerate the female, especially the pregnant female. Simping is an important part of human society. The problem is kind of a similar situation with like immigration, right? You can either have immigration or you can have welfare, but you can't have both. You can either have a patriarchal society that protects women and simps for them and believes them even when they're kind of bullshitting, but you can't give them fucking the ability to vote, and you can't give them the power. You can't give them political power and have that. You can either have one or the other. You can't have both. If you're going to have an egalitarian society where women are given every opportunity, everything that a man has in those regards, then at the same time, you can't be patriarchal. You can't simp.
Well, this is the big conundrum we're in right now. Is essentially
which way do we go?
Let's just look at it as it is now. Okay, so decades of feminist, or you could say gynocentric policymaking from before the suffrage movement till today has essentially created a situation where men's obligations have not changed, but women's liberties have, right? So men are in the same position they were before World War I, and if we get to the point, and it's starting to look that way, right? Yeah, we will be conscripted and expected to die for a country that doesn't actually respect us, and this is going to be a problem because you can see the rejection of going to war is a good one. Don't get me wrong. Again, I'd rather we didn't have to do that, but the reason behind it being that they're like, why would I die for a country that hates me for what I am, right? Because that's how bad it is today. But here's where the real issue is. You were just talking about this. In order for you to be able to protect something effectively, you must have authority over it. Yeah. So, and the issue is that men are expected to essentially be responsible for women, but they have no authority over women.
Yeah, so just a quick example, very quick example. Carolyn Ann Harlos, who is a libertarian, big libertarian, right? I deeply respect her as an LP individual. She works in Colorado. They do amazing work. And she's one of the few people that protected Mises Caucus when there was horrible things going on within the LP, right? Like, she is a respected, former treasurer. She's very, very respected in the LP, but she has this one weird feminist weakness, where she keeps coming up and saying, I was on the subway and there was this, homeless man accosting this woman, and where were the men? None of the men stepped in to stop it.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
And it's and I don't want to tell her, because I know she's not really part of the problem in voting for the things that did this, because she's a hardcore libertarian. But there's every part of me wants to shake her and go,
but dude,
I'm not going to jail to protect you. Fuck off.
Right. She's still a woman, though. This is another thing that we gotta come to grips with. A lot of what we are experiencing does not simply boil down to data and incentives and there's nature going on. Women have a nature, and the most libertarian woman, and the people who work here at Honey Badger Radio are some of the most hardcore libertarian, ANCAP women that I've ever known, but they are still women. At the end of the day, there is a nature that comes out that they have to fight against. My wife does it too all the time. And I mean, she's probably more right wing than me on a lot of stuff. So, I mean, I don't know, not by much, but
if you're the mother of my children and we're in a relationship, I extend that to I extend to you the same thing I would extend to my children, which is an extension of my legacy, myself. There's an extension of myself. Yeah. But some random chick on the subway, I'm not gonna fucking go to jail.
Well, of course, yeah.
Because I fought a homeless guy and then he ended up dying, and then I go to prison like that blonde.
Yeah, Daniel Penny. Guy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, right. It's you guys wanted this. You wanted a society where the police and the state have ultimate authority, but us as men can no longer live in even the slightest bit of
not even the cops have it. What's going on in New York is a definite byproduct of a bunch of bad policies. Extension, yeah. So and again, I think there is a unfortunately, despite all of the laws and policy, etc., it boils down to there is a nature in men and a nature in women. It's being expressed. And I think that the reason, I've said this too, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are, I think that in general, there are two wings of politics because there are two sexes. And that's how they are expressed. One of them is more statist, and I think that women tend towards that because there's more security in that. There's more, at least that's the idea. And the other is more like, liberty oriented. And I think that men want that. And I think that that's the reason why men vote more, towards liberty and small government, and women tend to vote towards more big government. And except for this is actually an interesting thing, women who are married and have children are more likely to vote in line with their husbands because they suddenly know like where the taxation is affecting them, whereas a single woman or a single mother doesn't care because she's getting money from the state no matter what. Too, yeah, exactly. And they're involved, right?
So Robert Bella has a really good book. Robert Bella is obviously, he's dead, Harvard Press, and unfortunately he didn't get to finish the second. But there's a book called Theory it's Evolution in Religion from the Axial to the from the Paleolithic to the Axial Age. And in it, he discusses the psychology of, from the very beginning, of trying to understand where religions come from, right? Where did the concept of spirituality and the evolution of religion, which is especially important to understanding our current religions, understanding evolutionary monotheism and the Semitic religions, etc. But there is, in the beginning, he talks about, trying to isolate what it is that makes the human species unique compared to other human species, to other primate species, other than just IQ and opposable thumbs. Because something had to come before IQ and opposable thumbs. Like why, like all these other primates have opposable thumbs, but they don't have our IQ. They don't have what we have. What was the spark? And as far as he's concerned, and a bunch of researchers, primate researchers, psychologists, etc., that there is these things that are present within mammals, but only humans have all of them. And it's these four things. One is maternal instincts. The other is paternal instincts, right? So many mammals will have maternal instincts, and some of them, even like bonobos, will have paternal instincts. But in most mammals, you don't have that, right? So you don't have a desire for the man to care for a child and the woman to care for a child as a team, collective, together. And then the other two things are disposition to dominate others, and then a disposition to resent domination. These are kind of the four unique evolutionary building blocks as far as he's concerned as to why we became humans, developed religion, developed society, developed culture, etc. And I think there's some truth to that in this concept that there's a pull between these two seemingly paradoxical values, which is I want to dominate the other and I want things to be in my favor, but I hate the idea of being dominated. And I think that's probably a better explanation for the two political systems of overly enlarged government for security and safety, and then liberty. I think that those things are actually fundamental, not necessarily in a male-female. Now, do I think that female tendencies, and again, this is that issue with humans lacking a heuristic that allows us to see the distribution.
Yeah, it's not an absolute.
I do think that women tend very heavily to favor this disposition to dominate. And I do think men tend to favor this resentment of being dominated, this disposition to resent the idea that I lack liberty. But I think it's a core fundamental thing, and it does kind of Venn diagram a little bit with maternal instincts, and because the family life is communist, right? It's everyone gets a fair share, everyone gets opportunities, everyone gets, it's one of the mother's most sacred duties in a family is to ensure that nobody is treated unfairly, and that everybody gets a fair shake, everybody gets the same opportunity, everybody's voice is heard, right? That the husband isn't too authoritarian with one child, right? That is what it means to really manage a home. It's more than just having the kids and raising the kids. It also means controlling the man's behavior in the household. That's also part of a woman's duty, I think.
Yeah, sure.
And
except that
when you give that political power, that's when it becomes a problem.
But that's actually very useful for people who want
scalable.
Political power, right? Because they can use. That's what I'm saying. Like, we have talked about how on the show, essentially, politicians have turned women into a voting bloc by essentially. That's why, like, when you look at, and it doesn't matter if they're Republicans, Democrats, whatever, even libertarians, they will appeal to women they make that a priority because they don't think that it works if you appeal to men. And in fact, if you try to make an appeal to men, women will become like resentful of that because they want to be the ones pandered to.
Terrible strategy. It really just comes down to this, which is that there's one demographic that basically decides the outcome of every single election where it is a toss-up, right? So if you're in a purple district, right, that is white suburban women. That's it.
Yep.
Suburban women. Why? Because women that live in the cities and in the country are already decided. Men are mostly already decided. The one demographic of people that can change from Democrat to Republican, Democrat to Republican, Democrat to Republican in any election is going to be suburban women, particularly white women, white suburban women. If you can get the
or
Karen's
middle class
vote,
women, yeah,
right. Well, it's the suburbs is a district where you're not necessarily right wing or left wing. Neither are your friends, right? And so if you can get middle class white Karens to vote for you, you win the election. And you see this with, let's say, Loudoun County and Virginia, where the Republican won over in Virginia, despite Bloomberg spending hundreds of millions of dollars again to try and swing the state blue. How did all of that money fail and the Republican won? Moms for Liberty and pissed off moms about what's going on in schools and critical race theory and queer theory in schools was enough to activate suburban white women to go, what the fuck are in these schools? That's crazy. And he won. That's how you win an election. It will always be how you win an election in America until there is significant demographic shift where that block is no longer as valuable, which probably will happen soon. But nevertheless, I mean, now the way that you win elections might be, bringing in a bunch of immigrants and then accidentally having them on voter ID rolls. But, I didn't say that, YouTube.
Somebody in your chat, I'm looking at your chat. Somebody said the name of the baseball player, Trevor Bauer. Just want to give a shout out to Trevor Bauer. Hopefully, that girl. That
shout out for not beating your wife.
For actually shout out for recording everything, which is, something that I guess most men wouldn't think they should be doing, but apparently they should be, especially if they're wealthy and, because they're going to draw kind of like snakes towards them. Also, I used to be a teacher. Somebody mentioned that the same thing about not having authority, but expecting to be responsible, also applies to children. I'm not sure about the home. I think that you could work that out, individually. But I know that in schools, I have done some teaching, and male teachers are so unusual these days. It's like 85% women, maybe higher in the United States.
It's a toxic work environment for a male.
It is. There's a lot of problems.
Unless you're a feminine male.
Again,
if you're feminine, it's different. But if you're a masculine male, it's a toxic place for you to be.
It's probably not. I could probably get a job if I was a drag queen. Let's be real. So if I decided setting
aside your ability to get the job, I just mean it's not a welcoming place for a man to work.
But it used to be.
Anybody that's ever worked in a female-dominated profession knows that you're walking on eggshells when you're in that work environment, and they'll tell jokes about their boyfriends and their husbands, and they'll tell jokes about penises and about sex and about all these things. And as a man, don't you fucking get involved in this conversation whatsoever, because the moment you say something in there that offends anyone in that group, your life's over. Your life is gonna be ruined by a sexual harassment charge, despite the fact that they're saying wild shit. Because there's a bias there, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad bias. Again, I don't think it's necessarily bad that we let women get away with telling dick jokes, and we're a little bit more careful about dudes saying sexual things to women when there are no other dudes around, right? I think that's probably a good instinct. The problem is when they have power. It's right, you can't have the power and the protection. You can't have both. It's kind of like Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. There is a responsibility if you have that power, but if you get rid of my power, I don't fucking keep the responsibility. It's insane.
Yeah, I personally, because I think this is all a problem that comes out of human resources departments and the let's say our tendency to be overly litigious about everything. I frankly think that women and men should be able to joke about whatever they want. I think that there is such a thing as, let's say, courtesy to, like, know that you don't just say whatever around whoever. But I don't care if guys want to tell dick jokes. I really like the, what, because
what I mean to say is very quick. Like I think it is a good instinct that we think something's wrong with like a Don Draper Mad Men work environment where you walk in to like go tell your boss about something real quick and he slaps you on the ass and calls you sugar tits, right? Like you don't want that environment for women. And so the way that you stop that environment is that you have to stop it before it starts, which means you have to be overly protective of the females in that environment. The difference is when the females run the HR departments and it's all the women that are the mediators and judiciary as part of this process. You can't have patriarchal protection run by women, because what you have now is a pseudo patriarchy that is actually a matriarchy masquerading as a patriarchy that gives us all of the bad shit, all of the responsibility, and none of the ability to actually discriminate or be honest or engage in reality.
I think that comes with other problems. I mean, I don't think men want to work in an environment like that. So you because if they have to be on eggshells, and we just talked about that, it's not worth it. And HR departments and sexual harassment and stuff like that.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
The reason we're on eggshells is because women run it and there's that protective instinct.
Exactly. So then we are essentially getting the results from what was perhaps started in earnest. But then that brings another question. Another thing that I advocate a lot for is that what men need. So we have this problem where a boy comes into this world and he probably gets circumcised, and then he is probably raised by a single mom, which means he is probably more likely to be exposed to abuse, and then he goes into a school and all of his teachers are women, almost all of them. There are no men in his vicinity except for maybe the security guards if it's in a rough area, and he goes to university, and all this time he's getting a feminist education, because not just public education, all education is feminist, like all of it. With charter schools, Catholic schools, private schools, it's military schools, all of it. Our military is feminist. I mean, so he is surrounded by this ideology, he's bombarded with it everywhere. And then he turns out to be kind of a mess. I mean, we can't really blame him. So we gotta. What I say is that there has to be something that we can bring to men, young men in particular, boys, as a kind of release valve. And that, for me, this is what I advocate for: is that boys have their own spaces. And every time boys make a space, feminists invade the space because they don't want men coming together. And I have an idea as to why that is, but I can get into. But I can give you some examples. For example, there used to be men-only clubs. There used to be boys' club, the Boy Scouts. Women can join the Boy Scouts now. All of these sort of male. I was part of a boys' club as a kid, and it was good. You go on trips. You learn skills. Right. You have
ever read Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam?
No.
Must read book. It's a little dated. It's more of a history book now than an accurate book. But there's a lot of reasons those men's clubs failed, and it's not just feminists invading the spaces. Though that definitely did happen. There's Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam is a seminal piece of work of sociology in understanding where this really started. And it's not feminists that started it. It's the isolation of men from those communities because of World War II and because of the GI Bill and the creation of the suburbs. And all of a sudden we started shopping, working, and living in 3 different areas instead of living together as a community. And there's a kind of an anomie thing where man is separated from the community and separated from his labor because he's, part of a machine, a cog. It's worth a read. You should absolutely read it. It's great. I
mean, that's interesting. But again, men are trying to form communities now, and those still get invaded and broken up by feminists. So
D&D,
so even though,
right?
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah, nerd spaces.
Yep. We can't beat them in them anymore.
the men never said women couldn't join. It wasn't like a men only thing. It's just they let some women in, and some of them were enthusiastic. Like, you know, there are girl gamers and girl nerds that are legitimate, but then it becomes a bigger space because the men invest time and energy into it, and then it gets broken up because they're like, well, we're in here and we don't like any of this stuff. And I think there's another reason for it, though. I think that the one thing that it seems like, because we're not just talking about like activist groups and like, you know, meddling women that get involved. We're talking about government organizations. We're talking about the Department of Homeland Security. We're talking about the FBI. They go into forums. They go into, you know, these male spaces, and they observe and they nudge and they like meddle with that. And I think the reason ultimately is, and I think this should go in line because I believe this, and I also have libertarian leanings myself, like pretty strong ones. The biggest threat to the government are independent men with families. Like, because those men who think for themselves, they're more likely to want to have their own guns, or more likely to be pro. I do. I think, and if they're married and they have kids, firstly, they're invested in the future because they have children. Secondly, their wife is going to be on their side and they're going to work together. I think that is like a man who is atomized and has no prospects, right? And has no future and is told that he's a piece of shit is dangerous for himself, but also for the people around him, because that's where you get like these kind of, you know, suicidal, violent, self-destructive guys.
Those would be a bigger. I think those would be a bigger threat to the government than atomized family, because I think
they'd be a threat to regular people, not the government, like to other families.
They'd be a threat to both. I think there's a double side. There's a flip side to that coin, right? I do agree with you that atomized conservative men are more likely to become activists, to engage, you know, in a peaceful resistance kind of way, and get together a larger mass of people and be able to change opinions and hearts and minds, etc. But there's a double side. It's a double-sided kind of situation, and the flip side would be that, like, they have weaknesses, right? They have their family, they have their children. The desire for security, a man that has no family might be nihilistic. He might say, fuck it, take away my security, take away something, put pressure on me, doesn't fucking matter. But if I've got a wife and kids, all of a sudden I might shut my fucking mouth if there's some type of threat towards them. You know what I mean? I can use those things against you. Those are weaknesses against you. Whereas a lone wolf kind of guy that goes into a group made up of a bunch of other people is absolutely more dangerous to society than he is to the government. But I would still say he's probably also far more dangerous to the government than the atomized family man. I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily.
No, I don't mean an atomized family man. I mean like a community of families that are intact, and they're all talking to each other, like men talking to each other, sharing ideas, showing each other skills and whatnot. That's serious stuff, man. I mean, isn't that basically the founding fathers? Were they just like a bunch of chads like hanging out and like shooting at
it's actually a bunch of teenage dudes, really. So they're all like 19 to like 24, but like but the thing is that, like, I think sometimes we kind of like anthropomorphize the state, we humanize the state, we give the state like this like Machiavellian kind of tendencies, that there's like the deep state, that there's this plan, right? And I think more often than not, what it really is it's a monopoly on power and violence, and it is kind of just how it's disassociated ideology that, when put together, has a life of its own. Like, I don't know that the state is like, I don't know that the FBI, for example, is like the biggest threat to the corporate interests is like men Discord servers talking to each other, right? But there's like this incentive structure where it's like the FBI has to, validate their job. And so because I have to validate my job, I have to catch terrorists, right? Well, how do I catch terrorists? Well, the way that I catch terrorists is I go embed myself in communities, and then I push and nudge them almost to the brink of action, so that then I can stop that action, so I can go, look, I stopped the terrorist. Because it's way, way, way harder to track down the real terrorist that's already planning secretly. It's way easier to push groups and mentally ill people and things like that towards, you know what I mean? Like it's a bunch of shit like that. So I think it's less about what is a threat to the state and more about understanding the incentive structures that the cathedral as a whole, the media, academic institutions, you know, the kind of like global organizations like the World Economic Forum and our government institutions and the bureaucracy, what incentive structures kind of push them in certain directions, and then understanding that we have this blob with an insane amount of power and unlimited funds because they have the capacity and the means to tax. And then I think we get a better understanding of how the state operates. I think we too often try and humanize it because we need an evil thing, and we need the idea of like an evil person with motives. The state doesn't have motives. The state has incentives.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. It's got incentives to essentially make itself relevant, keep relevant, right? But like this works on women. How does the state do that for women? Essentially, especially women on welfare. That's basically why there are women on welfare. This was all like, I mean, the plan of the Great Society, right? Lyndon Johnson. But then like what is
Social Security too is
yeah, Social Security too, and like now
Security,
Obamacare, whatever it is.
Yeah, with Social Security, for example, people don't think of Social Security as a means of splitting apart families, but it absolutely is, because if Social Security exists, then there's no excuse for you not to be able to pay child support. If Social Security exists, then there's no excuse to, not be able to kick your grandparents and other people out of your community, out of your home, out of the mother's suite in your backyard, and having a separate house for your mother. Social Security is the very beginning of the social safety net that begins to destroy families because it gets rid of the grandparents. And then it gets rid of the concept that you and I have to put our money together, save it together, invest in it together so that we can retire together. And so Social Security really is the beginning of the destruction of the family. It's not even welfare and it's not even child support. It really all starts with Social Security.
Yeah. So then I think,
soon, but
yeah, I know. That's okay. I gotta go soon too. I know you got another debate coming up, but that basically is in line with what I'm saying. I think that, you're right. If it breaks up the family, then it benefits the state, not because they're going after it, but they're just trying to get whatever, essentially say you need us because we give you Social Security. You need us because we give you welfare. We give you food stamps. We give you housing. We give you a cell phone, your Obama phone, whatever. But then what that says is if there is a family that is intact and it's in a community and there are, look at the Amish, for example, right? Like there's like massive extended families and they're very anti-government. They're not necessarily the model that I would go, but like they're a good example of how it can be done. And I don't think the state is a big problem for them. Yeah.
There is a YouTube video called, I think it's called like Dinner with the Amish or something, like something close to that. You should be able to find it. There is a misnomer and it is a lie that has been spread by the left. It is a sneaky little fucking thing where people think of the Amish as Pennsylvania Dutch horse and buggy carriage. The overwhelming majority of Amish, Beachy Amish, and Mennonites are people that use cell phones, that have houses, that have electricity. For some reason, some of them don't have porches. Like there are some weird shit there. But they are the most libertarian, most conservative, happiest, most successful communities. And people go, well, you don't want to live like the Amish because you don't want to have like no electricity.
Right.
It's actually, no, you do want to live like the Amish. The Beachy Amish is some of the greatest way that you could live in a community where you're actually engaged.
And they again, right. And they don't, like, they're not affected by the incentive structure because they don't need it. And they have it all figured out. And I agree with you. I mean, I shop at an Amish grocery store. I think it's in Blacksburg or Christiansburg, which is like a nearby town. Yeah. And they use cell phones and cash registers and the internet and all that. So, but okay. Anyway, Fabian, thank you so much. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to say before, we take off. Any like final words? I'll end the show there.
No, it's fine. Like I said, I have, I'm going to go on here and, take a pee break and go debate against, lefties about whether or not Nazism is socialism. It is. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, we know.
And right.
And, I got, like I said, I got permanently banned from Twitter. My account, I never got it back. It was when Jack Dorsey was still running it, and I said,
I've never
you
been
know,
banned by Twitter.
yeah.
I know what you're
said
talking about.
something to the effect of Nazism and communism are all leftism, and people like flipped out at me, and I was like, dude, just do the research, like just trust me.
But yeah, if you ever want to talk again, hit me up or whatever. I'd love to talk
Yeah.
men's issues or libertarianism, or if you really want to get into like we can go into my sphere and really go into deep libertarian philosophy and stuff too. I'd love to talk with you about it too. Whatever,
Sounds good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it. And again, I just want to say this, for the record, this is the level of discourse that we try to stay at when we talk about men's issues, because we're looking at a big picture here. This isn't just about like a guy trying to get a date. This is like way more than that. But unfortunately, the stuff that,
but also
gets traction.
Ladies.
Yeah. Well, yeah, with not a lot of women, but we do have some women over here. So, anyway,
Take a
thanks.
cute femboy. I don't care.
Thanks so much, guys, for hanging out on the show. I'm gonna ask that you like, share, subscribe, and comment, and we'll talk to you all in the next one. Thank you so much. Talk to you later.
Are machines, dude. Okay, they are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.